You wake up in a small wooden room. And by room, I mean something that could technically be called four walls and a roof, but only if you're feeling generous and not particularly attached to things like insulation, airflow, or structural integrity. The air is damp. It clings to your skin like a guilty conscience. You take a breath and immediately regret it. The smell hits you like a war crime. It's a thick, sour, almost meaty stink, like someone left a cabbage to rot in a helmet filled with goat milk and then invited that helmet to the local peasant sauna. You're not sure if it's your tunic, the chamber pot, or the neighbor's fermentation bucket. Probably all three. Welcome to the Middle Ages, friend. The age of chivalry, castles, and an unholy amount of smells. There's no Febreze. No candles scented like alpine morning. The closest you get to an aroma diffuser is a damp sheep that wandered into your house and passed gas in its sleep. This is the olfactory Olympics. And you, my sweet, unprepared 21st century nose, are the newest competitor. So before you get too cozy, because yes, you're about to lie here for 2 hours being softly suffocated by medieval stench, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Only if you're into weird historical deep dives narrated by someone who hasn't slept since the Renaissance. Drop a comment too. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I like to imagine all of us drifting off together while pondering the scent of unwashed monks and herbal suppositories. Really brings people together. Now, let's settle in. Close your eyes, relax your jaw, and prepare to descend, nose first, into the putrid, fragrant, glorious pit that was smell in the Middle Ages. The first thing you need to know is that medieval people took smell very seriously. You might think, oh, surely they just smelled like garbage and got used to it. No. This was a society where scent was a moral issue. That's right. You didn't just smell bad, you were bad. Sin clung to you like body odor. And if you smelled good, you were obviously rich, holy, or suspicious. The nose was basically a social sorting hat. Doctors, in the sense that their degrees were mostly made of leeches and guesswork, believed that smells could cure or cause illness. Your humors, those precious bodily fluids medieval medicine loved so much, were thought to be influenced by odors. A nice herbal scent might balance your phlegm. A whiff of corpse stank? That could throw your black bile into a rage spiral. Also, let's not skip over the fact that people genuinely believed bad smells were the cause of disease. Not just an unfortunate side effect. Cause. As in, this child died of the plague because he got a big whiff of gutter soup near the tannery. The theory was called miasma, essentially, death by vibe. But what did things actually smell like? Let's do a tour. You shuffle out of your creaky little wooden bed, technically a bed, although it feels more like a hay bale that lost a knife fight. The linens are stuffed with straw, but also with mites, mildew, and the subtle suggestion of past regrets. Your mattress smells like betrayal. Not metaphorically. Someone literally betrayed you on it. Probably with fleas. Your feet touch the floor. Cold. Damp. A thick smear of something sticky greets your toes. It could be mead. Or blood. Or soup. Or some cursed medieval combination of all three. You inhale again. A mistake. The room smells of breath. Not minty fresh breath. Medieval breath. Breadcrumbs and tooth-rot breath. And sweat. And damp wool. And, wait, is that lavender? It is. Because tucked under the window, there's a bundle of dried herbs. Congratulations. You're one of the few villagers who remembered to hang some sweet-smelling plants to ward off evil spirits. And rats. And neighbors. Outside your window, the world is alive. Alive and deeply pungent. The streets are narrow, cobbled with uneven stones slick with centuries of grime. Open gutters run down the middle. The town's sanitation system consists of hope, gravity, and yelling, "Look out below," before dumping a bucket of waste out the window. The air is a pungent stew of horse manure, spoiled vegetables, fish guts, beer farts, and fear. You wander past the butcher, where animal heads dangle like festive decorations from sharp iron hooks. Flies swarm like paparazzi. The smell? Imagine liver mixed with pennies and sadness. That's the scent of meat that's been left out just a little too long in the summer heat, aka 3 minutes. A little further on, you reach the tanner's shop. And you will know this before you see it. Because tanning hides involved soaking animal skins in urine, lime, And if you're really unlucky, dog poop. The smell is intimate. It gets inside your teeth. You could describe it as earthy if the earth in question were a swamp filled with disappointment and chemical burns. The workers here carry the scent like a badge of honor. Or maybe they just can't get it off no matter how hard they try. But don't worry, your walk isn't all gross. There are some pleasant smells too. Like bread baking in clay ovens. Sweet, nutty, and comforting. A market stall selling apples and nuts. A church filled with incense, beeswax candles, and the faint perfume of dried roses clinging to a saint's shrine. See, not all is nose-based torment. But even these smells were coded. The church's incense? That wasn't just for ambience. That was spiritual Febreze. It was meant to cleanse the air of sin, death, and, yes, the people sitting next to you who haven't bathed since Pentecost. You pass a bathhouse. Lucky you. Not every town has one, and not every town wants one, thanks to the church's increasingly suspicious stance on nakedness. But here it is, a big wooden tub, steaming, filled with herbs and skin. Not your skin, other people's. Because communal bathing was a thing. You'd sit with strangers, soak your plague-prone limbs in the same lukewarm broth, and maybe get a haircut while you're at it. Or syphilis. Depends on the bathhouse. They tried to make it smell nice. Bay leaves, rosemary, maybe a citrus peel if the spice merchant was feeling generous. But mostly it just smelled like soup. Human soup. And occasionally, a side of gossip and premature death. But the crown jewel of medieval smell was, undoubtedly, the leprosarium. These were hospitals for the unlucky souls suffering from leprosy, a disease that did not play around. Noses fell off, fingers curled in. And yes, smells got real. Because one of the side effects was a rotting flesh stench so strong it could peel paint off the walls. But society, in its infinite medieval mercy, decided to help by isolating the afflicted, making them wear bells, and sometimes even legally declaring them dead. Nothing like a little symbolic funeral to cheer up your morning ulcer. But, strangely, the lepers themselves were often considered holy. Their suffering was seen as Christ-like. Their smell? A divine challenge. Some saints even sought them out, hugging them, kissing them, living with them. Because nothing says piety like huffing sacred decomposition. Now, if you're wondering what people did to combat these smells, the answer is interesting. First, perfumes. But not like modern perfumes. These were mixtures of flowers, herbs, oils, and desperation. Wealthy people carried pomanders, fancy little scent balls filled with cloves, musk, and the crushed hopes of peasants. Think of them like medieval AirPods, but instead of playing music, they just prevented you from vomiting in public. And then there were nosegays. Small bouquets carried around to shove into your nostrils whenever things got real. And they always got real. Some nosegays were even shaped to fit over the upper lip, like a little flowery mustache. You walk into a room, boom, insta-mustache. It's either charming or horrifying. Possibly both. And let's not forget the real MVPs of medieval scent control, the plague doctors. Ah yes, those beaked icons of fashion. Their signature bird masks weren't just for show. They were filled with aromatic herbs meant to ward off the bad air. And also probably to hide the fact that they didn't have a clue what they were doing. You're more likely to be cured by a hot onion compress and positive thinking. But the truth is, medieval people noticed smells. They talked about them, wrote about them, chronicled them with the same care we apply to wine tasting or coffee reviews. You didn't just smell something bad. You experienced a rank effluvium from the south wall. A noxious vapor of the devil's chamber pot. An odorous bloom of putrefaction. And they categorized them, too. Sweet smells were divine. Spicy smells were invigorating. And rotten smells? That was sin leaking out of your body. Medieval saints who died sweetly were seen as extra holy. Corpses that reeked were clearly condemned. There's even a story of a bishop who was secretly a terrible person, and when he died, his tomb oozed stink for weeks. Medieval true crime, smell edition. So here you are, breathing it all in. A world built not just of castles and swords and songs, but of smells. Layered. Complex. Sometimes holy. Often horrifying. But never, ever boring. And you're only just getting started. You wake up again. Same straw mattress. Same questionable draft slithering in through the wooden planks. You'd hoped it was just a bad dream. The meaty, footy, vaguely vegetal aroma of your room says otherwise. A rat scurries by. You name it Harold. Harold smells better than you do. There's no deodorant in this timeline. No toothpaste. No shampoo. No scented soap unless you're rich or planning to bribe a bishop. And you? You're a peasant. Welcome to your new identity. Your hands are calloused. Your feet are stained with mud. Your clothes are a mixture of wool, skin oil, and fate. And your smell? Oh, your smell is authentic, organic, locally sourced. But mostly, it's loud. Now, before we descend too deeply into this pungent abyss, pause, breathe through your mouth if you must, and take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I only ask if you genuinely enjoy falling asleep to historically accurate suffering with just a pinch of sarcasm. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off to the scent of cabbage, sweat, and desperation. Now let's get personal. Really personal. Because this chapter, it's about you, the peasant, the lowest class, the majority, the backbone of medieval society, the ones who worked the fields, paid the taxes, fought the wars, and, oh yes, absolutely reeked. Not because you were lazy. You worked all day. You burned calories like a 14th century treadmill. But your access to water, soap, and bathing in general was sporadic. Best case scenario, there's a river nearby. Worst case, you scrub yourself with sand and hope nobody notices. Your typical hygiene routine is something like this. Wake up. Scratch. Wipe your face with a bit of rough cloth. Maybe the same one you use for dishes. Or feet. Who's counting? If it's a Sunday or a holiday, or if someone died, you might wash your hands and face in cold water. You change your undertunic. By which I mean, you turn it inside out. You go outside. Congratulations. You're ready for the day. Let's talk about your clothes. Wool. Always wool. Thick, itchy, hand-woven wool. That smells like wet dog even when it's dry. There's no breathable fabric. No moisture-wicking anything. Your outfit soaks up sweat, rain, and body oils like a medieval sponge, and it holds that scent with the dedication of a stalker. Underneath that, a linen shirt. Or what used to be a linen shirt. Now it's more of a concept. It was white once, in theory. Now it's a shade best described as brownish disappointment. It's your sweat rag, your towel, your tissue, and sometimes your only defense against the cold. Laundry happens, let's call it infrequently. You have one outfit. Maybe two if you're rich enough to own a goat. And shoes? No. You go barefoot most of the year. Through mud, manure, hay, frost, and the occasional splinter cartwheel. Your feet have developed their own culture. By which I mean microflora. There's a specific kind of peasantfoot odor that can clear a room faster than a bishop with tax forms. Your diet doesn't help. You eat a lot of onions, a lot of garlic, leeks, turnips, barley mush, and the occasional fermented thing that no one can identify, but everyone agrees is probably safe. Spices are expensive. Salt is a luxury. So most of your meals are pungent, fibrous, and flatulent. Your breath smells like a 14th century compost heap with confidence issues. Let's address one of the most important yet ignored parts of medieval daily life, pits. More specifically, armpits, groin pits, and the universal pit of despair that forms when you've been hoeing turnips in 90-degree weather for 10 hours straight with no shade and a wool tunic. The scent is robust, tangy, with notes of ammonia and regret. Now imagine an entire village of people like you, working, sweating, rubbing against each other in tiny wooden buildings. The smell is a tapestry, a symphony, a warm, cheese-scented fog rolling through the countryside. You're not just part of the smell, you are the smell. The idea of personal space didn't exist. There were no private bedrooms, no individual hygiene routines, no my loofah, your loofah. You bathed communally, if at all. You shared everything, beds, bowls, fleas. It was egalitarian in a horrifying kind of way. But, and this is important, you didn't think you smelled bad. Because everyone smelled like this. The human nose, that magnificent liar, adapts. Your own stench becomes your neutral. Other people's stench? Familiar. comforting, even. It's the smell of family, of community, of, well, at least we're not the tanner. Occasionally, someone in your village would clean up. Maybe before a religious festival, or a wedding, or if the local lord was coming through and you didn't want to be executed for smelling like peasant. You'd wash in a barrel, maybe. Rub yourself with ash or sand. If you were fancy, you'd use soap made from animal fat and wood ash. It left you smelling like bacon and charcoal. Not ideal, but not worse. Some people wore herbs, tied little sachets of lavender, sage, or rosemary to their belts. Not because they thought it made them smell good, but because it helped ward off demons, or disease, or angry spirits drawn to the scent of toe rot. And let's not forget the festivals. Oh, the festivals. Imagine a spring fair. People packed into a town square, drinking, dancing, throwing things. There are no toilets, no garbage removal, no designated smoking areas. Just 600 humans in wool cloaks getting very, very festive in the heat. The smell? Part sweat, part booze, part roasted meat, and all chaos. It was basically Coachella, but with more leaks and fewer Instagram filters. By contrast, the rich smelled very different. But we'll get to them in another chapter. For now, you, humble peasant, wear your scent like armor. It protects you from judgment, from thieves, from courtship, possibly even from lice, if your body odor has reached sentient levels. The church sometimes got involved, too. Smell, you see, was moral. Cleanliness was next to godliness, but only if it was a holy cleanliness. Excessive bathing? Suspicious, tempting, sinful, especially for women. A woman who washed too often was clearly up to something, probably seduction, or witchcraft, or both. So what do you do when you can't bathe and everything smells terrible? You do what everyone else does. You live with it. You tell stories around the fire. You drink fermented barley water until the smell fades into the background. You complain about your neighbor's goats. And you sleep, fitfully, on a pile of hay that smells like 3 winters ago. But despite everything, life goes on. You get used to it. You find moments of peace. A whiff of bread. A spring breeze. The comforting scent of the old tree outside your hut that somehow still blooms. Because even in the foulest of ages, the human nose can find something beautiful. And tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all again. In the next chapter, we'll explore the upper class, the royalty, the nobles, the rich folks who smelled less like manure and more like a haunted apothecary. You'll discover that sometimes smelling good was its own kind of curse. Let me know when you're ready to keep going. You wake up again. But this time, it's different. There's no straw mattress poking your back. No mice squeaking in the walls. No damp wool sticking to your legs. Instead, you are in a bed, an actual bed, with sheets made of linen and something that might be silk, although it's unclear whether it's real or just very expensive deception. The room is large, cold, stone walls with the emotional warmth of a crypt. There's a fire burning in the hearth, but it does little. The draft is still here, only now it smells faintly of dried lavender, old wood, and something else. Something floral, but also rotten. Welcome to the upper class. You are nobility now. Congratulations. You own land. People call you milord or milady, even if your breath smells like wine and inherited guilt. You're surrounded by luxury, influence, and an absolutely baffling number of tapestries. And somehow, despite all of this, you still smell weird. Not peasant weird. Not I just tilled a cabbage field and got into a fight with a goat weird. No, this is a different kind of weird. A perfumed, powdered, musky weird that tells the world, I haven't bathed in 3 weeks, but I paid someone to rub crushed flowers on my wrists, and that makes me better than you. Let's be clear, bathing was possible for you. You had access to water, and in some cases, your manor might even have a bathhouse or a large wooden tub with hot water carried in by several servants who definitely resented you. But bathing regularly? That was complicated. First of all, doctors, and I use that word loosely, believed that too much bathing opened the skin to disease. That warm water opened your pores, and through these tiny holes, the devil himself could stroll in with a side order of plague. So instead, they recommended dry washing, sponging off with cloths, rubbing down with scented oils. Maybe some vinegar if you were feeling spicy. This is why, despite having access to exotic herbs, oils, and perfumes, you still end up smelling like a drawer full of wilted roses that someone accidentally left a ham in. Let's break it down. Your morning routine, dear noble, starts with being woken by a servant. No alarm clock, no coffee, just a slightly frightened person saying, "My lord, it's time," while silently hoping you didn't die in your sleep because they'll get blamed for it. You're dressed, not by yourself, of course. Your clothing is elaborate. Layers upon layers. A chemise. A doublet. Stockings. Cloaks. Jewels. Every bit of fabric traps warmth, dust, and, yes, odors. Especially the collars, which gently cradle your neck, sweat like a loyal hound. Now comes the fragrance. Nobles didn't necessarily clean themselves more than peasants. They just did it better. You powdered your wigs. Dusted your armpits with crushed herbs and talc. Carried pomander, tiny, ornate metal balls stuffed with cloves, cinnamon, and whatever smelled remotely less like medieval breath. If you were truly ahead of your time, you might carry a nosegay, a tiny bouquet to sniff dramatically whenever someone beneath you spoke. You didn't bathe every day, or even every week. You freshened. You layered. You performed olfactory theater. And it worked, at least in your courtly circles. Everyone smelled like old furniture and anxiety, so no one questioned it. But let's not forget the latrines. Yes, your home had a private toilet. Maybe even indoors. A garderobe, a small chamber built into the castle wall, where waste would drop directly down into the moat or pit below. And while this might sound luxurious compared to the peasant's bucket in a barn setup, it wasn't. The smell rose back up. Always. It marinated the stone, the walls, the linens, your clothes, the breeze. And if your servant didn't empty the pot fast enough, well, let's just say there's a reason castles had so many windows. There were perfumes. Oh, the perfumes. If you were wealthy, your fragrances were imported. Frankincense, myrrh, civet, which came from the scent glands of a small cat-like mammal. Yes, you read that right, cat-butt juice. Ambergris, which came from whale vomit. Musk, from the glands of male deer. These were exotic, expensive, and deeply unpleasant on their own. But mixed properly, they masked your human scent in the way a very loud trumpet might cover a sneeze. Temporarily and with great drama. And of course, you expected to smell nice. It was part of your identity. You were a noble. You didn't work. You didn't sweat. Therefore, in theory, you smelled divine. In practice, however, you smelled like someone set fire to a spice rack inside a dusty closet and then tried to put it out with old wine. Now let's visit court. You're invited to a feast. You wear your best clothes, which, let's be honest, have never been washed, only occasionally brushed off. You arrive at the great hall. The air is thick with roasted meat, body heat, and old wooden beams soaked with centuries of candle smoke. Everyone is in layers. The food is heavy. There is no air conditioning. And yet, people dance. They lean close. They whisper courtly nothings that smell like garlicky duck fat. And all the while, the perfumes swirl. Lavender and sweat. Musk and mildew. Wine breath and desperation. It's not so much a party as it is a sensory endurance challenge. And then, of course, there's the hair. You don't wash it. You powder it. You comb it. You tie it up. Maybe you wear a wig. Wigs were often made from human hair, horsehair, or a combination of both, and they were not cleaned frequently. Instead, they were perfumed, powdered, and occasionally fumigated if the lice got too ambitious. A noble's wig could be an entire biosphere unto itself. There are accounts of people storing small sachets in their hair to ward off bad smells. Some even used little combs dipped in vinegar to try to dissuade fleas from setting up colonies. But no one talks about it. That's the golden rule of nobility. Pretend. Pretend the food isn't bland. Pretend the servants aren't listening. Pretend that smell isn't coming from you. And yet, despite the overwhelming assault on the senses, smell was power. If you smelled good, people assumed you were clean, healthy, powerful. The same way someone wearing a $400 cologne today can walk into a room and command attention, even if they haven't showered in 3 days and subsist entirely on protein powder and Red Bull. And when nobles traveled, they brought the smell with them. You could tell a noble caravan was approaching long before it arrived. The horses, the unwashed clothes, the perfumed trunks, the general air of wealth, disease, and artistic self-delusion. It was less of an arrival and more of a waft. In contrast to peasants who smelled like the earth, the noble class smelled like they were trying to bury it under 6 layers of rosewater and denial. But here's the thing, for all their money, power, and spices, nobles were just as nose-blind as everyone else. They lived in the same world. They just paid more to pretend they didn't. So whether you were a baron or a barley farmer, one truth remained universal. Medieval people had a complicated relationship with smell. And it wasn't about pleasantness. It was about survival, status, and sometimes, superstition. You wake up in a city this time. That's new. You can hear church bells somewhere in the distance, although the sound is muffled by the thick fog rolling in off the streets. Except, it's not fog. It's miasma, the invisible cloud of death that medieval people were absolutely convinced could slink through your nose and into your soul. Congratulations. You've woken up in a plague year. It's the 14th century. The Black Death is sweeping across Europe like it's got somewhere to be. And people, being clever, superstitious, and occasionally desperate, have developed a very specific theory about why this is happening. It has to do with bad air. Yes, they believe that smells could literally kill you. Not just offend, not disgust, but actually murder you. This wasn't some fringe theory. This was mainstream medicine. Miasma theory ruled the medical world for centuries. The logic was simple and terrible. If you could smell something foul, like rot, sewage, or Bob the fishmonger's feet, it meant the air was poisoned. And if the air was poisoned, you were next. Naturally, this led to a booming market in smell defense. Because if bad smells killed, then good smells must heal. So you, dear plague survivor, are now armed with a variety of scented weapons. First up, the pomando. It sounds fancy. It's not. It's a little metal orb on a chain, stuffed with herbs, spices, and occasionally crushed gems, because nothing says medical science like grinding up a ruby and inhaling it through your nose. You wear it around your neck or belt, or clutch it in your sweaty, terrified fist as you tiptoe through corpse-laden alleyways. Inside, you'll find cloves, cinnamon, frankincense, rosemary, sage, and occasionally dried rose petals or camphor. It smells like the world's most aggressive potpourri bowl. You press it to your nose, and, according to the medical experts of the time, it forms an aromatic force field that keeps the plague from entering your face holes. But what if you're a doctor? A learned man of science and leeches? Well then, you get the most iconic, terrifying, and utterly impractical fashion item of the Middle Ages, the plague doctor mask. You've seen it. The bird beak. The wide-brimmed hat. The long black robe. It looks like a goth toucan. Some got a degree in epidemiology. But the beak had a purpose. It was stuffed with herbs, flowers, vinegar-soaked sponges, whatever it took to block out the death stink. You literally walked around with a nasal bouquet taped to your face, hoping that lavender and mint would stop the Black Death from noticing you. These masks were less about filtration and more about denial. But they gave a sense of control in a world that smelled like burning feathers, human panic, and yesterday's dinner turning into today's regret. And it wasn't just masks and pomandis. People went all in on scent-based medicine. If your neighbor caught the plague, you might burn herbs in your house. Carry a sponge soaked in vinegar. Place aromatic flowers around your neck. Rub your feet with garlic. Apply onions to your armpits. Yes, that's a real thing. Inhale smoke from burning rosemary or juniper. Pour rose water into your nose and pray it didn't sting too much. In fact, doctors often prescribe fumigations. Not the exterminator kind. The lock yourself in a room and set fire to a bowl of sulfur and hope it works out kind. Because nothing says effective medical treatment like turning your house into a lightly perfumed gas chamber. And when all else failed, bloodletting. Nothing to do with smells. Just a medieval classic. Feeling sick? Better let out a pint or two of blood. Feeling better? No. Then let's try 4 pints. We'll stop when you faint. Or die. Whichever happens first. Let's not forget the most popular remedy. Move away. Cities reeked of disease. So people ran for the countryside. They thought the smell of open air, pine trees, and sheep poop would somehow be safer. To be fair, sometimes it was. Not because of the smell, but because you weren't standing shoulder to shoulder with the entire unwashed population of London. Speaking of London, it smelled terrible during the plague. Imagine this: the streets are narrow, crowded, and slick with mud. Except it's not mud. It's a combination of rainwater, rotting food, human waste, dead rats, and mysterious liquids that no one wants to talk about. You walk through it in leather shoes or barefoot, if you're lucky enough to be poor. Every breath is a gamble. Every corner could contain a body. And every whiff could, according to the science of the day, bring death straight into your lungs. So what do people do? They panic purify. They hang herbs in windows, rub aromatic pastes on their skin, light candles made from beeswax and thyme, anything to mask the smell of mortality. In wealthier homes, you might even hire someone to wave scented fans around your room. Literally, a professional flapper. Human air fresheners were a real thing. Because nothing screams elite response to mass death like hiring someone to stand in a corner and swat rosemary-scented air at your dying grandmother. And still, people died. Because the smell wasn't the cause. It was the symptom. But it gets weirder. Some people believe that bad smells weren't just dangerous, they were divine punishment. God was angry, and he had a scent profile. So religious leaders urged people to fast, pray, and purify their homes. Incense was burned in churches. Processions marched through plague-stricken towns swinging censers full of smoke. Because if the Lord couldn't handle your sins, maybe he'd tolerate frankincense. And yet, amid all this horror and superstition, there were moments of accidental brilliance. People who bathed regularly, or at least changed their linens, sometimes survived longer. Not because they smelled nice, but because they reduced exposure to fleas, which were the actual plague carriers. Likewise, burning herbs in a home might kill bacteria. Not enough to save you from the Black Death, but enough to mildly freshen the air before you keeled over. There were even smell maps. Early attempts at smellscapes, where towns tried to chart which areas were most dangerous based on how foul they smelled. Did these maps work? No, but they made people feel like they were doing something. It's the medieval version of Googling your symptoms and deciding you definitely have 6 different types of incurable plague. By the late 1600s, with plague outbreaks still haunting Europe, people began carrying vinegar-soaked sponges in silver containers. You'd whip it out whenever someone coughed. Like a medieval Vicks inhaler, but way more dramatic. And so, a whole culture emerged around the idea of defensive smelling. People became obsessed with blocking, masking, overpowering, and purifying the air around them. Not because it worked, but because it gave them hope. Even today, the remnants of that thinking linger. Scented candles, hand sanitizer that smells like a mojito from a sad resort, air fresheners shaped like pine trees. We are still, in some ways, plague survivors pretending we're in control by sniffing lemon verbena and vanilla bean. So the next time you walk into a room and someone says, "What's that smell?" just remember, in the Middle Ages, that question might have been the last thing you ever heard. And with that, we've barely scratched the surface of the stench-soaked world of historical health. Next, we'll explore how cities smelled, from the fish markets to the open sewers. You'll walk the streets of medieval Paris and London, and I guarantee you'll be grateful your screen doesn't come with smell-o-vision. You wake up on stone. Not in a bed. Not in a barn. Just stone. Cold. Unforgiving. Slightly damp, as if the earth is trying to remind you who's really in charge. You sit up. You're in an alleyway. There's a rat inspecting your boot, and what appears to be a cabbage leaf that lost a duel with time. You hear footsteps, clanging bells, people yelling. Congratulations. You've woken up in a medieval city. London, Paris, Florence, Bruges. Doesn't matter which. The smell is the same. It is universal. It is timeless. It is layered. This is the smell of civilization before plumbing, before garbage collection, before anyone figured out that rotting things should not live where people do. The first layer is animal. The streets are full of them. Dogs, pigs, horses, chickens, goats, cows, every kind of livestock you can think of, and a few you probably can't. And they are everywhere. They're not just passing through. They live here. They eat here. And, most importantly, they relieve themselves here. That smell you're noticing? The sharp tang in the back of your throat? That's horse urine mixed with the more earthy tones of pig droppings and whatever the dog ate last night. It was probably another pig dropping. Horses are the worst. They're majestic, yes, but they poop like it's a competitive sport. And there are thousands of them, because horses are the engines of the city. No Uber, no bike lanes, just horsepower in its original, biological form. Each horse leaves behind a steaming little love letter to your nasal cavities. The second layer is human. Now, let's clarify. Human presence is fine. Human waste, however, is omnipresent. You pass a tavern. Someone throws a bucket out the window. There's a brief splash. You don't look up because you've learned not to. That wasn't rain. It was the chamber pot. It's called gong farming. Yes, that's the real term. Gong farmers were paid not enough to collect human waste from cesspits and latrines. Usually at night. They'd shovel it into carts and haul it outside the city walls to be dumped or, if you're feeling optimistic, used as fertilizer. But they didn't do it every day. Sometimes not every week. So the waste sat there. In pits. In ditches. In buckets under the stairs. The smell wafted. Stewed. Matured. Like a fine cheese that hates you. Some streets have open sewers running down the middle. These are technically called kennels, but don't let the name fool you. No puppies here, just a small river of everything you'd rather not step in. The third layer is industrial. Progress. Medieval cities were hives of productivity. Blacksmiths, tanners, butchers, dyers, brewers, fullers, and fishmongers, each with their own signature scent. And when I say signature, I mean it's burned into your memory like a bad tattoo. The tanneries are the worst. Tanning leather required urine. Human urine. Lots of it. Workers would wade into vats filled with wee and animal hides and stir it with their bare legs. Yes, bare legs. Some tanneries added dung to the mix for extra chemical flair. Imagine that aroma. A hot summer day. The sun baking down on open pits of piso cowhide and feces-marinated sheep wool. The breeze carries it straight into the marketplace. Your bread now tastes like regret. Not to be outdone, the dyers use stale urine, too, plus various plant and insect extracts. And fishmongers? They throw their leftover fish guts straight into the street. Because trash collection doesn't exist. Just toss it outside is the official waste management policy. Then there's the butchers. Their shops are open air. No refrigeration. They hang animal carcasses on hooks, surrounded by buzzing flies and stray dogs with hope in their eyes. Blood and entrails flow into the gutter, adding their own pungent symphony to the urban perfume. And if you think the bakeries or breweries might offer some relief, think again. The bakery smells like burned grain and body odor. The brewery smells like sour beer and the apprentice's feet. No one here is washing their hands, or their aprons, or their morals. Now let's walk toward the marketplace. It's the busiest, loudest, and smelliest part of town. Dozens of stalls crammed into narrow lanes, shouting merchants, wandering pigs, children screaming. The aroma is chaotic. You get overripe fruit, fresh bread, rotten cabbage, spices, onions, smoked fish, live chickens, and something you really hope is just cheese. All of it smashed together in a nose cocktail that changes every few feet. People are cooking meat on open fires. You smell char fat, smoke, delicious, until you realize the firewood was probably garbage and the meat might be yesterday's leftovers reheated with a side of lies. Let's visit the public bathhouse. You might think, finally, a place of cleanliness. Oh no, absolutely not. Bathhouses are communal. A social event. There's hot water, yes, but it's shared. That's right, everyone's soup. You bathe, gossip, eat, and possibly engage in activities not approved by the local bishop. The water isn't changed between guests. It's topped up, stirred, maybe skimmed. It smells like wet fabric, oil, and warm regret. Now it's evening. The smells shift. The fires are lit. Wood smoke joins the mix. The city now smells of soot, singed hair, and things best left unburned. The animals settle in. The people retreat to their homes. But the waste remains. The streets are still wet. The gutters still gurgle. There are no street lights. Just darkness and damp. The smell of mold creeps in. Of mildew on stone. Of wet wool and damp cloaks and that one guy who hasn't changed his shoes since the last harvest. You, unfortunately, live above the butcher shop. The smell is permanent. It's in your walls, your sheets, your soul. But eventually, you get used to it. Not because it stops smelling, but because your brain gives up. Olfactory fatigue. A miracle of human survival. You just stop noticing until someone new walks into your room and promptly throws up into their sleeve. Of course, the wealthy had the luxury of escaping the city when it got too smelly. They'd head to country manors and breathe in the fresh scent of sheep dung and hay bales. Which, honestly, was an upgrade. But the poor? They stayed. They smelled. They survived. Cities functioned in this atmosphere. People were born, married, buried, and occasionally caught fire, all while surrounded by what modern noses would call a biohazard. And yet, amid all this stench, people still found joy. They wrote poetry, fell in love, told jokes, baked terrible pies. Because humans are weirdly adaptable and remarkably stubborn. You might not think you could survive medieval urban stench, but give it a week and you'd be elbow-deep in fish guts telling someone, it's not that bad today. The tannery's closed for St. Crudas Day. So now that you've walked the streets, ducked the chamber pots, and inhaled at least 6 diseases through your nose, you might be wondering, did they ever clean anything? Like ever? You wake up to the sound of sloshing water. That's rare. Almost comforting. But don't relax. Not yet. Because the water you're hearing? It's not a spa. It's not a bathhouse. It's your neighbor dumping yesterday's laundry water out the window and directly onto your head. You're welcome. You've been baptized in medieval cleanliness. Let's get something straight before we go further. The myth that people in the Middle Ages never bathed is about as accurate as a pigeon with a crossbow. People did bathe. They liked bathing. They just didn't always get the chance to do it in a way that made sense or worked or didn't result in a rash. So now that you're dripping and irritated, it's time to explore how cleanliness worked or didn't in the medieval world. And I hope you're ready, because this is going to be equal parts soap, superstition, and skin conditions. Let's start with your face. You wake up. You grab a basin. If you're rich, it's pewter or brass. If you're poor, it's a wooden bowl that smells faintly of onions and last week's porridge. You splash your face with water that's probably cold and possibly shared. Soap? Maybe. If you're lucky, it's lye-based, made from animal fat and ashes, like the worst artisanal bar you've ever met. Smells like regret and burns if it gets in your eyes. But it does clean. Kind of. And here's a fun fact. People did wash their faces. Often. Especially in the morning. Because starting your day without a face rinse, even in a plague-ridden, chamber-pot-riddled city, was apparently a bridge too far. Next, your teeth. Yes, they cleaned their teeth. No, it didn't help much. Toothbrushes? No, not as we know them. But they had chew sticks, small twigs with frayed ends, rubbed on the teeth like a very disappointed pipe cleaner. They also used clocks, fingers, or sometimes the end of a feather. Tooth powders were a thing. Made of crushed eggshells, charcoal, salt, mint, sage, and occasionally powdered deer antler, because nothing says oral hygiene like scraping your gums with ground-up animal bones. Your mouth now smells vaguely of barbecue and disappointment. Dentistry? Hilarious. If you had a toothache, they might pull the tooth. With pliers. Or forceps. Or string and brute force. Anesthetics? Only if you count screaming as a form of distraction. But let's move on. You're cleanish. Your mouth is full of medieval mint and questionable enamel. Time to deal with your body. Bathing was complicated. Public bathhouses existed, and they were popular. In towns like Paris, London, and especially in Islamic cities like Cordoba and Baghdad, bathhouses weren't just common. They were essential parts of urban life. The baths themselves were usually heated. You'd go through stages: hot room, warm bath, cold rinse. If you were wealthy, you might have your own private tub. If you were average, you share the water with a dozen other sweaty strangers. If you were poor, you washed in the river and hoped the fish didn't judge you. But then the church got involved. At some point in the later Middle Ages, bathhouses got a reputation. And not the good kind. Too much nudity. Too much mingling. Too much unchaperoned steam. Monks and moralists decided that bathhouses were dens of sin and syphilis. So they started closing them down, or regulating them into oblivion. Suddenly, cleanliness became suspicious. People began to worry that open pores might invite disease. That water carried illness. That touching your own armpits was an invitation for the plague. So guess what people did? They started dry washing. Yes, dry washing. That meant rubbing your skin with linen cloths, scented powders, or, if you were especially devoted, bread crumbs on your skin to soak up the oils. A medieval exfoliation routine brought to you by your local baker. If you were fancy, you used rosewater, or vinegar, or a tincture made from boiled herbs and hope. People carried little flasks of scented water and dabbed themselves delicately. Imagine a noble woman lightly patting her wrists with lavender water, then stepping over a dead rat. Glamour. But what about the hair? Hair was a point of pride, especially for women. They didn't wash it often, maybe once every few weeks, but they did care for it. Combs were common. Wooden, bone, or ivory. Sometimes decorated. Sometimes lice-infested. Speaking of lice, they were everywhere. Everyone had them. You, your neighbor, your pillow, your dog, your dinner, probably. To deal with them, people would delouse themselves regularly. They used combs, oils, smoke, sulfur. You'd sit with a friend, and they'd go through your hair looking for tiny invaders. It was social, intimate, horrifying. Clothing, another mess entirely. You didn't wash your outer garments often. Wool cloaks, linen tunics, silk gowns, those were expensive and delicate. So you wore an underlayo, a shift, chemise, or shirt that you could wash. Washing clothes involved boiling water, lye soap, beating the fabric on rocks, and hanging it to dry in the sun, which helped kill bacteria but didn't stop birds from pooping on it mid-dry. Laundry day was a workout. You'd sweat, scrape your knuckles, and lose feeling in your hands. But hey, your shirt now smells slightly less like goat. And now, the armpits. Deodorant didn't exist. Perfume did. If you were wealthy, you might dab some on. If you were average, you might rub herbs or vinegar under your arms. Sage, rosemary, thyme. Basically, you turned yourself into a walking stew. But remember, body odor was normal, expected, even appreciated. A natural musk was a sign of vitality, of virility, of not dead yet. That said, bad smell still had meaning. People believed stink could indicate illness, sin, or even demonic influence. If you smelled really bad, people assumed your soul was in trouble. This led to hygienic rituals. Washing your hands before meals, wiping your mouth, cleaning your shoes. These were social customs, not just about health, but about class. If you were clean, you were respectable. If you were filthy, you were either a farmer or about to be arrested. Now, let's talk toilets. Again, in case you thought medieval people had the decency to build privacy into their hygiene, let's disabuse you of that notion. Public latrines existed, but they were few and far between. Most people relieved themselves in privies, outdoor wooden boxes over pits. If you were in a castle or monastery, you might have a garderobe, a chute that led to the moat. Yes, the moat. That romantic body of water surrounding the castle? It was a glorified toilet. Some people kept chamber pots under their beds. If they were especially classy, they emptied them. If not, well, the flies were very understanding. Toilet paper? A hilarious fantasy. You used rags, moss, hay, or your hand, and then washed. Or didn't. Depends how much dignity you had left. Now let's talk about what happened when you tried to actually get clean. Say you get a fancy idea. You heat some water. Strip down. Get into your wooden tub. Within 5 minutes, your neighbors hear you scream. Because the water's too hot. The soap got in your eyes. There's a spider under your butt. And now you slipped, hit your head, and invented medieval concussion protocol, which is basically sleep it off and hope you don't die. Worse, now you've opened your pores. Which means, according to 14th century science, that you're vulnerable to miasma. That bad air can enter your body. Which means bathing is now dangerous, especially during outbreaks. Better to just rub yourself with basil and cry. But here's the twist. Despite all this, people cared about being clean. They talked about it, wrote about it, gave each other hygiene advice. Parents taught kids how to wash. Doctors recommended regular bathing, when possible. Monasteries had scheduled bath times. Nuns trimmed their fingernails. Knights cleaned their armor and, occasionally, their armpits. Even peasants, with limited access to resources, would bathe in rivers, scrub with sand, and change into clean clothes on holy days. Because at the end of the day, no one likes being gross. Not even people in a world without shampoo. So now that you're squeaky-ish clean, let's prepare for our next topic, medieval love and romance. Oh yes, we're going there. Because if you think poor hygiene stopped people from dating, you've never seen a knight try to seduce a noblewoman while smelling like boiled onions and ambition. You wake up in a hay-stuffed mattress that smells vaguely like wet dog and disappointment. Birds are chirping. Somewhere, a pig is squealing. And your neighbor's goat is chewing on your left shoe. Today's the day. You've decided you're going to fall in love. Good luck. Because medieval romance is not the stuff of Disney fairy tales. It's not roses and candlelit dinners. It's more like hope you survive the flea bites long enough to see your betrothed. This is the kind of love that comes with dowries, plagues, and the occasional bard with boundary issues. The air smells like cheese. The tension smells worse. So before you slip into your most flattering tunic and attempt a courtly wink, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's lying in bed learning about medieval armpit courtship from across the globe. All right, you've rubbed on some rosemary, tucked your fleas in for the day, and you're ready to mingle. Let's begin with the basics. How do you meet someone in medieval Europe? Well, assuming you're not a noble, you don't have many options. There are no dating apps. No speed dating events. No medieval version of Tinder, unless you count accidentally locking eyes across a smoky tavern while your ale is being watered down for the third time. For most people, relationships started in the village. With people you already knew. Childhood acquaintances. Cousins. That's not a joke. Sometimes literally cousins. Not first cousins, if you're lucky. Maybe second. Maybe related but we don't talk about it cousins. Noble families, on the other hand, had it even more romantic. They got married off at the age of 8 to someone who lived 5 duchies away, had a lazy eye, and already owned 2 castles and a personal priest. Love wasn't the point. Property was. Dowries. Alliances. Vassalage. Lust was something you outsourced to your squire or quietly ignored until the wedding night, which was likely supervised by a monk and a grandmother. But let's say you're one of the lucky few who gets to pursue love on your own terms. How does it go? Step 1. Flirting. Which sounds fun, until you realize it involves 0 eye contact, 17 layers of clothing, and a chaperone standing 3 inches from your ear whispering prayers. A nobleman might write poetry. Bad poetry. The kind that rhymes love with dove and glove and possibly above because he ran out of ideas. He'd hire a bard to sing it under your window, where it would compete with the sound of chickens and dysentery. He might send a token, a handkerchief, a flower, a small carved wooden object that definitely isn't suggestive unless you have a dirty mind. He'd bow. You'd curtsy. He'd bow again. Then both of you would go home and overanalyze the encounter for the next 6 weeks. Meanwhile, in the peasant class, romance was a little more practical. You meet at market. You make awkward jokes about turnips. She laughs. You ask if she wants to help you milk a goat sometime. She says yes. You help her carry firewood. She throws a chicken bone at your rival. You propose. You don't need poetry. You need someone who can cook, wash, survive, and possibly fight off wolves. Now let's talk about chastity. Or rather, the complete theatrical illusion of chastity. Officially, sex outside of marriage was frowned upon. Very frowned upon. Like fines, stocks, public shaming, and eternal damnation levels of frowned upon. Virginity was prized. Purity was sacred. The church made this very clear. Unofficially, people were doing it anyway. In the fields. Behind barns. In monasteries. There are literally medieval court records filled with complaints about priests, monks, and nuns sneaking off to, let's say, experience the human condition together. Villagers often shared beds, especially during festivals or in crowded households. And you'd think that would be awkward. But remember, people had different standards of privacy. You might sleep in a room with 6 siblings, your parents, 2 pigs, and a wandering minstrel who forgot to leave. If someone got frisky under the blankets, you just rolled over and tried not to make eye contact. There's even a term, bundling. In some parts of Europe, especially in the Low Countries and Scandinavia, unmarried couples could sleep together, with clothes on, under supervision, to get to know each other. It was like dating with chaperones and full woolen armor. And yes, babies happened. Illegitimacy rates were high. Nobles often had acknowledged bastard children. Kings had entire rosters. Henry I of England? Over 20. It was practically a varsity team. But don't worry. If you got pregnant out of wedlock, there were options. Not good ones, but options. Some towns offered marriage by compulsion, where the man was legally forced to marry the woman he'd seduced. Others offered shame. Lots and lots of shame. Public penance. Fines. Possibly exile. Sometimes worse. And if you were unlucky enough to be accused of witchcraft because you got pregnant mysteriously, well, that's a whole different chapter. And it smells like smoke and injustice. Now let's talk about marriage itself. Because nothing says romance like legally binding yourself to someone whose hygiene routine involves sheep fat and positive thinking. Marriage ceremonies varied by region and era. Sometimes they were held in churches. Sometimes in taverns. Sometimes just in front of witnesses. All you really needed were vows, verbal declarations, and ideally, a priest. But not always. The church eventually stepped in and tried to regulate it all. But for a long time, you could basically declare yourselves married and start arguing about firewood. The bride wore something. White wasn't traditional yet. She wore her best outfit. Maybe borrowed. Maybe blue. Maybe still damp from the morning's bath. There might be a feast. There might be music. There might be a lot of drunk relatives making speeches about goats. The couple might get led to bed while people threw barley at them and shouted prayers. Romantic. And then came the wedding night. Let's pause for a moment and really set the scene. You're lying on a straw mattress. You've never been naked in front of another human voluntarily before. The room smells like sweat, wax, and cheese. There are people standing outside the door making bets. Someone is snickering. Someone is praying. Someone is loudly chewing an onion. And now you're expected to consummate a relationship that was arranged 6 years ago, possibly by your uncle, who is currently peeking through the keyhole. No pressure. But let's say you survive the awkwardness. Maybe you even fall in love. What does love look like in a world without scented candles or Spotify playlists? It looks like surviving together. Working the fields. Bearing children. Burying some of them. Arguing about pigs. Praying. Celebrating feast days. Watching each other age faster than modern grapes. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. It was practical, fragile, occasionally sweet, sometimes brutal. There were love letters, especially among the educated. There were secret affairs, often between nobles and their servants. There were songs, poems, sighs. Even in a world of filth and fear, people still found ways to long for each other. Because humans are humans. Even if they haven't bathed in 3 weeks and think romance means showing up with a half-dead chicken and your last tunic. Now let's end on a scent. Imagine lying in bed next to your beloved. The fire crackling. Your feet warm. The smell of herbs hanging in the air. Maybe rosemary. Maybe lavender. Maybe just less terrible than usual. You're not rich. You're not clean. But you're alive. And someone next to you chose to lie down beside your stink and stay. That's love. Medieval style. You wake up to the sound of bells. Not the kind of gentle chime you set on your phone to rouse you at 7:30 a.m. with calm bird sounds and ocean waves. No, these are medieval church bells. Loud. Relentless. Like someone is clanging a pot next to your ear because they think salvation is an emergency. It's Sunday. Again. Time to put on your best tunic, that one that doesn't have fresh pig entrails on it, and make your way to the holiest place in town, the church. Which smells exactly how you'd imagine a stone building filled with damp peasants, beeswax, incense, and mortal terror might smell. A place of worship. A place of reflection. A place where spiritual enlightenment mingles freely with foot rot. Let's set the mood. The church is enormous. Or at least it feels that way, compared to your 2-room hovel. Its stone walls are cold. Its floor is packed with the crushed hopes of previous generations. There are no pews unless you're filthy rich or clerical. You stand, or you kneel, on hard stone, sometimes for hours. Your knees are now historic artifacts of suffering. The air inside is thick, not with peace, but with incense. And I mean thick. Clouds of it. The priest swings the censer back and forth like he's trying to fumigate a biblical plague, which is ironic because he probably still believes the plague is caused by sin and not, say, fleas. You inhale. Your lungs fill with myrrh and regret. The air smells like holiness, asthma, and medieval air freshener. Which is to say, not great. But you keep breathing. Because you need forgiveness. You also need somewhere to sleep that doesn't involve your brother's feet, and the church at least has a roof. Let's talk about that incense for a moment, shall we? In theory, it's symbolic. An offering to God. A rising of prayers. In practice, it's also a really convenient way to mask the fact that you and 70 of your fellow villagers haven't bathed since Pentecost. Myrrh, frankincense, and copal were popular choices. Imported, exotic, and ridiculously expensive. But worth it. Because without them, the place would smell like roasted beetroot, wool sweat, and the slow decay of human skin cells trapped in tunics since last harvest. And that's just the clergy. Yes, the clergy. Let's dive nose first into that blessed barrel of contradictions. Contrary to what you may have been told, medieval monks and nuns weren't all pristine, pious vessels of purity. Some were deeply devout, sure. Others? Not so much. Some of them snuck meat during Lent. Some snuck lovers into their quarters. And all of them, smelled like damp wool and centuries-old parchment. Monks didn't bathe often. It was considered vain. The body was temporary. What mattered was the soul. You couldn't see a soul, but you could smell a monk even from across the cloister. Their robes? Unwashed. Their socks? Homemade, damp, and eternal. Their cell? Filled with a musty, papery smell of handwritten theology and unventilated farts. But still, they were holy, sacred, close to God, especially if God had a thing for onion breath and sandal rash. And the church buildings themselves weren't much better, especially if you were lucky enough to worship in a major cathedral. These stone behemoths could take over 100 years to build. Imagine that. 100 years of scaffolding, stone dust, and peasant curses etched invisibly into the mortar. You're not even worshiping in a finished building. You're worshiping in a construction zone that's older than your bloodline. Inside, you've got relics. Holy, mysterious, sometimes suspicious. A bone from a saint. A splinter from the true cross. A vial of holy sweat. Or maybe breast milk. Yes, that's a thing. There were actual reliquaries said to contain drops of the Virgin Mary's milk, or Jesus's blood, or a saint's toe, suspended in glass, crusted in gold, surrounded by the aroma of centuries of belief and absolutely no refrigeration. These things were believed to hold power, and sometimes they smelled. Oh yes, there are documented cases of relics producing sweet smells when venerated. These so-called odors of sanctity were signs of divine presence. Or, the fact that someone snuck a drop of perfumed oil onto a rib bone and called it a miracle. Saints, it turns out, were known for being fragrant in death. Yes, fragrant corpses. It was believed that truly holy individuals did not rot the way sinful mortals did. Instead, their bodies released sweet, mysterious smells. Almonds, flowers, honey, cinnamon. This wasn't considered creepy. It was considered proof of sainthood. Because apparently, the quickest way to canonization is to decompose politely. Now let's turn to pilgrimages, which are basically medieval religious vacations without the comfort, sunscreen, or the ability to leave a bad Yelp review. You pack a bag, fill it with bread, prayers, and maybe a toe ring if you're feeling flirty. You walk, miles and miles, sometimes barefoot, sometimes on your knees. You arrive blistered, dirty, half-dead, and triumphant. Your destination? A holy site. Maybe Canterbury. Maybe Santiago. Maybe some random cave in Bavaria where a monk once saw a glowing pigeon. And when you get there, you mingle with thousands of other sweaty, exhausted pilgrims, all crammed together, praying, sneezing, farting, and weeping into the same stone floor. The smell is transcendent, in the sense that your nose tries to transcend your face and run away. Some pilgrims brought home souvenirs, little badges, pieces of cloth, holy water in tiny vials. You wore them proudly, even though the holy water often went stale, or moldy, or, in rare cases, spontaneously developed life. Let's not forget the flagellants. These were people so devoted to repentance that they would march through towns whipping themselves to atone for sin, both personal and collective. They chanted, bled, smelled like old wine, blood, and damp linen. It was performance penance. And boy, did it leave an impression. Mostly on their backs, but also on your sense of smell. Now, what about death in the church? Because, spoiler alert, people died. Constantly. And the church handled a lot of it. If you were wealthy or well-connected, you could be buried inside the church, literally under the floor, right beneath where people walked, knelt, and held Massachusetts. Which sounds very reverent until you realize that a lot of these bodies weren't buried particularly deep, sometimes only a few feet down, and churches weren't ventilated. So yes, it got ripe. Imagine worshiping on a warm spring day. The sun is shining through the stained glass. The incense is working overtime. And somewhere beneath your feet, Uncle Baldwin is fermenting. Eventually, church officials had to stop burying people inside because of the smell. And, health. But for centuries, death and decay were a part of the sacred space. You didn't just worship with your fellow villagers. You worshiped with their ancestors, and their ancestors' ancestors, and a small family of opportunistic rats. Finally, let's step outside and talk about medieval saints' feasts. These were celebrations of holy lives. They involved processions, music, theatrical reenactments, and, this is true, sometimes even edible relics. Yes, edible. In some cultures, pilgrims consumed tiny pieces of cloth dipped in oil that had touched a relic, or drank water that had been sanctified by proximity to a saint's tooth, or ate cakes blessed by the bishop and possibly sneezed on by the entire congregation. The smells were overwhelming. Baking, candles, sheep dung, perfume, vomit, wine, the spiritual and the biological, all colliding in glorious nasal overload. In the end, what you need to remember is that the medieval church wasn't just about belief. It was about the full sensory experience. The cold stone, the flickering light, the aching knees, the droning chant, the sweet smoke, the occasional waft of decomposing nobility. Fade was something you could smell, literally. And if that smell was occasionally indistinguishable from mildew and undercooked barley, well, that just made it more authentic. So rest easy, pilgrim. Your sins are many. Your body is rank. But the church accepts you anyway, provided you tithe, repent, and don't collapse from the incense before the sermon ends. You wake up. Again. But this time, you're not in a bed. Not even the straw-filled apology of a bed you usually get in your damp peasant hovel. No, today you wake up on a battlefield. A literal one. Or maybe just near it. Hard to tell. Everything smells like iron, mud, and the inside of a dead horse. You blink slowly. The sky is gray. Your tunic is soaked in something that you desperately hope is rainwater. It is not. Welcome to war. The noble art of stabbing strangers for someone else's land. It's been 2 hours since dawn. You've been awake for 20 minutes. And in that time, you've already smelled more varieties of human suffering than any modern soldier sees in a 6-month deployment. There's no coffee, no strategy briefing, no motivational speech about duty and valor. Just a grizzled man with 3 teeth shouting something about spears and a knight trying to mount a very disinterested horse. You stand up. Your legs creak like old church pews. Every joint has developed arthritis overnight. Your boots are soaked through with blood, piss, and battlefield soup, a charming stew of mud, bile, sweat, and the tears of the recently disemboweled. Welcome to the olfactory hellscape of medieval warfare. Let's start with the camps, because even before the battle starts, the smells are doing half the killing. A medieval military camp is not a clean place. It's not even a particularly organized place. It's more like a pop-up festival, if the festival was dedicated to dirt, dysentery, and badly cooked turnips. You're surrounded by hundreds, sometimes thousands of soldiers, each of whom has the hygiene of a goat on fire. There are no showers, no latrines, just trenches if you're lucky, trees if you're not, and boots if you're feeling rebellious. Waste disposal involves walking a few paces from your tent and letting nature take its course. And then there's the food. You're eating salt pork so old it has its own tax records, barley mush so bland you can taste your own thoughts, and onions, endless onions. Because onions are cheap, plentiful, and they vaguely resemble nutrition. Everyone smells like meat that's been screamed at by the sun. The air is thick with campfire smoke, burnt garlic, body odor, and farts. The tents are worse. Picture 50 men packed into a space meant for 10. They're sweating, coughing, scratching lice, telling stories, and slowly fermenting. Some are drinking. Some are vomiting. Others are sharpening blades that haven't been cleaned since the last war. You lie down on a lice-ridden blanket next to someone who hasn't bathed since their christening and fall asleep to the soothing aroma of trench foot and roasted rat. And then the trumpet sounds. Time to march. To war. You line up, shoulder to shoulder with your fellow soon-to-be statistics. The guy next to you hasn't brushed his teeth since birth and is muttering a prayer in between bites of cold sausage. Your commander shouts something vaguely encouraging. You don't hear it. You're too busy trying not to pass out from the smell of wet chainmail and impending doom. Now comes the real treat, battle. The battlefield is a ballet of screams, steel, and stomach contents. You charge forward, sword raised, shield out, bowels clenched. The first smell to hit you is the mud. That rich, earthy, squelchy smell of churned-up earth mixed with blood and sewage. Horses defecate mid-gallop. Men do the same, often involuntarily. Then comes the metal, hot iron, blood, and rust. Weapons clash. Blades pierce. Arrows thud into flesh. The air is filled with a coppery tang of blood and the acrid sting of burning torches. And then there's fear. That very particular smell of terror sweat. Your own and everyone else's. Fear makes people sweat differently. It's thicker, salter, more pungent. It smells like regret and armpits. Multiply that by a few hundred soldiers, and you've got yourself a panic sauna. Next, the wounded. Oh, the wounded. Soldiers crawling, limping, screaming. Guts trailing like sad, slippery scarves. Bodies pierced, burned, split open like overripe fruit. Open wounds smell like iron, yes, but also rot even within minutes. Especially in warm weather. Some wounds are cauterized on the spot. Hot iron on flesh. The sizzling, popping, meaty smell of instant regret. If you're lucky, the battle ends quickly. If not, you get to enjoy several more hours of sword-swinging aromatherapy. When it's finally over and the survivors are limping away, the aftermath begins. This is the worst part. The battlefield after a fight is a perfume of decay. Bodies everywhere. Some intact. Most not. Horses lying on their sides, their guts steaming. Human corpses in various states of completion. And then the flies. Oh God, the flies. They arrive almost immediately. And they never leave. They swarm in thick, angry clouds. You inhale and accidentally swallow 3. The smell of a day-old battlefield is almost unspeakable. Meat. Rot. Pus. Blood. Feces. Burnt wood. Burnt hair. Burnt. Everything. And urine. Lots and lots of urine. From the dead, the dying, and the terrified. Sometimes the dead are left for days. Sometimes weeks. Sometimes they're buried in shallow graves by monks who hold their noses with one hand and their cross in the other. The doctors, if you can call them that, don't help. Most are just barbers with extra knives. They smear wounds with honey, mud, or pig fat. They stitch with dirty thread. Amputate with a rusty saw. No anesthetic. Just a strong grip and a lot of screaming. Their tents smell like wet linen, old blood, and fear. If you recover, you're a miracle. If not, well, welcome to the pile. Let's not forget the sieges. Ah yes. A special flavor of suffering. You're stuck in a castle for months. No food. No clean water. No escape. You eat rats. Then you eat the horses. Then you think about eating Jeff from accounting. You wouldn't, of course. But you think about it. The air inside the castle is thick. Hundreds of people. One toilet. Maybe. You defecate in a bucket. Or in a corner. Or out a window. It doesn't matter. The smell finds you. And outside, the attackers aren't just building ladders. They're flinging diseased corpses over the walls using catapults. Yes, literally, hurling rotting bodies into your courtyard like gruesome meat confetti. Sometimes they use animal carcasses, sometimes human heads. It's called biological warfare. Medieval edition. The smell is so intense that even your dreams start to stink. Eventually, the siege ends. Either the attackers leave or you run out of food and start eating leather shoes. Either way, you'll never smell fresh air the same way again. Let's take a moment to talk about horses. War horses were majestic, strong, loyal, deadly, also incredibly stinky. They sweat profusely. Their stalls reek of ammonia. On the march, their waste is everywhere. And if one dies in battle, which happens often, it starts to bloat almost immediately. If you've never smelled a bloated horse belly rupturing under the sun, congratulations. You've avoided a smell that is frequently described as life-altering. And then there are the knights. You'd think they'd smell better. All that shiny armor. All that nobility. But no. Knights were human too. Sweaty, stressed, and layered in 80 pounds of metal and boiled leather. Armor traps heat. It traps sweat. It traps everything. After a day of fighting, a knight smells like an iron pot filled with onion stew and despair. And they can't clean it. They just air it out. Maybe. If they have time. Which they usually don't. Some had squires to help them undress. Most just slept in their armor. Meaning the inside of their breastplate smelled like damp dog and roasted ham. To sum up, war smells like death. Like every part of death. Before, during, and after. It's physical. It's emotional. It's nasal. It's the scent of 10,000 people all regretting their life choices at the same time. So the next time you watch a medieval movie and see a glorious battle, just know, they left out the smell. And what a smell it was. You wake up in a bed this time. That's good. The bad news? You're in a medieval hospital. A healing house. Which is a generous term for a repurposed barn filled with moaning people, damp straw, and the faint smell of death slowly becoming permanent. Your head throbs. Your stomach's been churning since you ate that questionable fish pie. And your right foot is, well, you're trying not to look at it, because you're afraid it's developing independent opinions. You think, maybe I'll see a doctor. Cute. You mean a physician, of course. Or maybe a barber surgeon, if you like your medicine administered by someone who also trims beards and extracts teeth with the same pair of pliers. You sit up. Slowly. Your mattress makes a squelching noise. That's not ideal. The room smells like warm milk, damp linen, garlic, unwashed bodies, and a robust undercurrent of wet dog. Not that there are dogs here. Not alive, anyway. So before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, only if you're genuinely enjoying this stroll through history's least aromatic moments. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Especially if you're listening in bed, because nothing says sleep aid like the scent of 14th century gangrene. Now, back to the doctor. He arrives eventually. Not in a hurry. He's dressed in black robes. Not because he's mysterious or dramatic, but because black hides the stains better. He smells like cloves, vinegar, and resignation. His hands are stained with something that used to be blood, but is now more of a color suggestion. He doesn't examine you. He observes. At a distance. He asks questions about your urine. Not your symptoms. Your urine. He wants to see it. Smell it. Maybe taste it. Yes, taste it. That's a thing. Medieval doctors tasted pee to diagnose illness. Apparently, notes of honey meant diabetes. Notes of despair meant you were just English. He may ask to look at your stool. There's a chart for that. Like a medieval wine tasting will but for poop. Yes, sir, a fine consistency, like goose porridge. This suggests an imbalance of the humors. Let's talk about those humors, shall we? The dominant medical theory of the medieval world was that your body was governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Every illness was caused by an imbalance of these. Feeling sad? Too much black bile. Feverish and angry? Too much yellow bile. Sniffling and tired? Phlegm. Just died? Probably too much blood. The solution? Balancing, which usually meant bleeding or vomiting. or being purged with laxatives so aggressive they could remove your ancestry. Doctors carried a small arsenal of nostril-assaulting remedies. Let's sample a few. Leeches, stored in little jars that smell like old pond water and poor decisions. Doctors would stick them behind your ears, on your neck, or wherever the blood was bad. You'd bleed. The leech would swell. Everyone would feel a bit worse than before. Cupping, not the spot-a kind. This involved heated cups placed on your skin to raise blisters. The smell? Burning hair and scalded flesh. Like a medieval barbecue with no meat, just pain. Poultices, essentially compost wrapped in linen. Think mashed garlic, pig lard, crushed onions, moldy bread, and occasionally ground-up bugs. They were slapped onto wounds or swellings, reeking like a kitchen dumpster on a hot day. Trepanning, this one's fun. They drill a hole in your skull to let the demons out. It smells exactly how you'd expect, like bone dust and abject horror. No anesthesia, just a prayer and a helper to sit on your chest. And then there's the medicine itself. Most medieval remedies were combinations of herbs, animal bits, and whatever smelled strong enough to convince you it was working. Let's walk through a few patient favorites. Wound salve made from goose fat, honey, and ashes. Smells like burnt breakfast. Eye treatments involving crushed onions, wine, and bile. Spicy and deeply uncomfortable. Tonic made of vinegar, mint, wormwood, and urine. Because if you're not nauseous, are you even healing? If you're wealthy, your physician might mix up a fancy electuary, a paste made from spices and ground pearls mixed with sugar or honey. It costs more than your entire family is worth and tastes like sweet dirt. But it smells strong enough to make you believe in it. If you're poor, you're getting mustard plasters, nettles slapped against your skin, or a good old-fashioned prayer while someone waves frankincense in your general direction. The frankincense helps. Slightly. But not enough to drown out the stink of everything else. Now let's not forget the plague doctors. The ones with the beak masks. They wore long leather coats and stuffed the beaks with strong-smelling herbs and spices, rose petals, cloves, lavender, and myrrh. Not for your benefit. For theirs. Because everything around them smelled like death. Rotting bodies in the streets. Boils leaking onto bedsheets. Rats with big dreams. Those masks weren't for style. They were desperate olfactory armor against a world decomposing in real time. Meanwhile, you're back in your hospital bed, trying not to vomit from the smell of your neighbor's wound. It's infected. It smells like boiled socks, metal, and doom. A priest walks by holding a crucifix and a bucket of holy water. He sprinkles it liberally. On the patient, the bed, and accidentally your face. The water smells of mold and overconfidence. You close your eyes. You pray for healing. You receive a prescription for pigeon dung mixed with vinegar and a lecture about Saturn being in the wrong part of the sky. And still, the smell lingers. Medicine was a gamble, sure. But it was always a smelly gamble. Even childbirth, oh, we're going there, was soaked in bad scents. The birthing room was filled with stale rushes, animal skins, burning herbs, and the sounds of someone being told to just breathe through it, while having no access to pain relief beyond biting a stick. Midwives carried bundles of herbs, sage, rosemary, and rue, to ward off evil spirits and the smell of childbirth itself, which was part miracle, part trauma, and 100% bodily fluid. Surgery? Performed in your home. On your kitchen table. The doctor wipes his blade on his sleeve and says, "Hold still." There's no antiseptic. No sterilization. Just brandy, a strong will, and the smell of whatever you had for dinner lingering nearby. In summary, medieval medicine did not smell like a doctor's office. It smelled like a butcher's tent that's been abandoned for a week, rain-habited by hopeful rodents, and occasionally visited by a mun with herbs taped to his forehead. And if you survived, well, congratulations. You were either incredibly lucky, or your body just gave up trying to die.